Hello and welcome back to the channel. It's wonderful to have you here again at Confident Beauty, where every style tells a story. In our last episode, we explored Mexico, a land of expressive beauty and cultural pride. Today, our journey takes us to a place where style has always been shaped less by fashion capitals and more by climate, landscape, and lifestyle. Welcome to Australia. Australian beauty is relaxed, practical, and quietly confident. For women over 50, hair has never been about excess. It has always been about freedom, comfort, and authenticity. Join us as we explore 100 years of Australian hairstyles for women over 50, shaped not by rigid rules, but by real life. In the early decades of the 20th century, Australian women over 50 typically wore hair that was long, controlled, and deliberately practical. Australia's heat, dust, and wind meant that hair needed to be reliable, not fragile, so the most common looks were center or side parts with hair gathered into low buns, twists, or compact rolls at the nape of the neck. The goal was a clean silhouette that stayed put through a full day, whether that day was spent at home, at community events, or managing the rhythm of family life. This was also an era where grooming signaled self-respect, so hair was brushed thoroughly, smoothed carefully, and kept neat rather than decorated. Any softness came from the natural texture of the hair itself, not from heavy styling. For mature women, these tidy updos carried a calm authority. They framed the face, kept the neck cool, and matched the understated elegance of the period. The Australian version of early 20th century hair did not chase drama. It leaned toward restraint, endurance, and dignity, a look that felt appropriate in a country where practicality was a form of quiet sophistication. As the 1930s and 1940s arrived, hairstyles for Australian women over 50 began to soften, but the core values stayed the same: tidy, durable, and suitable for warm weather. Many women moved toward shoulder-length or mid-length hair that could be pinned back into low shapes, while keeping gentle face framing waves for a more approachable femininity. You would see controlled waves around the front, then the rest of the hair secured into low rolls or smooth pin sections that resisted humidity and held their form. The look was polished without looking precious. If there was volume, it was modest, focused around the crown or the sides to balance the face. Importantly, the style remained wearable, something that could transition from daytime responsibilities to evening outings without requiring constant maintenance. For women over 50, this era delivered a flattering compromise. The softness of waves brightened the expression and softened facial lines, while the pin structure maintained the composed, dependable look that was valued. Australian hair in these decades reflected a preference for quiet elegance over theatrical glamour, with styling choices that made sense for daily life and the realities of climate. By the 1950s and into the 1960s, Australian women over 50 increasingly adopted more set-looking finishes, but still interpreted them with a distinctly Australian practicality. Rollers and careful shaping created rounded volume and smoother edges, producing a groomed silhouette that lasted through long days. However, compared with more rigid versions seen elsewhere, Australian styling tended to keep movement and softness, avoiding extreme stiffness. Many women favored structured yet friendly looks, classic medium-length shapes, soft bobs, and neatly layered cuts that could be brushed into place quickly. As the 1960s progressed, shorter cuts became more common, partly because they were easier to manage in heat and partly because they felt modern and clean. A short bob or a cropped layered cut offered a refreshed appearance without demanding elaborate upkeep. For women over 50, the appeal was obvious. These cuts delivered shape and lift around the face, helped hair look fuller, and reduced the daily burden of styling. This period set the foundation for the Australian preference that would become even more dominant later: hair that looks intentionally groomed, but never looks like it is trying too hard. The 1970s were a turning point for Australian style because the national image leaned strongly into outdoor living, beach culture, and a more natural approach to beauty. For women over 50, hairstyles increasingly reflected comfort and authenticity. Medium-length cuts with soft layers became popular because they moved naturally in the wind, dried more easily, and worked with hair's inherent texture rather than fighting it. Many women wore shoulder-length styles that could be tucked behind the ears, pulled into a simple tie, or left loose without looking unkempt. Instead of crisp set curls, the texture was looser and more relaxed, the kind of wave that comes from air drying, salt air, or a light brush through naturally wavy hair. This decade also normalized the idea that hair should serve your lifestyle. In Australia's climate, that meant hair that tolerated sun exposure and daily activity. For mature women, the 1970s look often softened the face, created easy movement, and signaled a confident ease. It was the beginning of a distinctly modern Australian philosophy that beauty is healthiest when it feels lived in, effortless, and true to the person wearing it. In the 1980s and 1990s, international trends brought more volume and stronger shapes back into the spotlight, but Australia again adapted them with restraint. Women over 50 embraced layered volume, lifted crowns, and fuller silhouettes, yet the finish usually remained wearable rather than extreme. Layers were used strategically to add body and bounce, which helped hair appear thicker and more youthful, especially for women experiencing thinning. In many cases, the hair was cut to support movement, not stiffness, and styling aimed for a confident outline that still looked approachable. As the 1990s progressed, the aesthetic simplified. Cleaner lines, smoother finishes, and practical bobs or medium-length cuts took over. The styling looked polished but not fussy, and women often chose shapes that could be maintained with a quick blow-dry or a simple brush-through. For women over 50, this era offered flexibility. You could keep some volume for presence, but still align with Australia's preference for comfort and function. The result was a mature, modern look that communicated confidence without sacrificing ease, a signature of Australian style at its best. From the 2000s through today, Australian women over 50 have increasingly prioritized hair health, authenticity, and low-effort sophistication. The most common choices became layered bobs, medium-length cuts with natural movement, and short, textured styles that work with texture rather than demanding constant heat styling. Australia's climate and lifestyle encouraged cuts that look good with minimal intervention, meaning a haircut that holds shape as it grows, and texture that looks intentional even when air-dried. In the 2010s, many women adopted modern soft bobs and shoulder-length layers that framed the face gently and offered easy styling options. Then in the 2020s, a clear shift accelerated: the confident embrace of gray hair. Australian women over 50 have been among the most visible advocates of silver authenticity, wearing gray not as surrender, but as a statement of self-respect. The best modern Australian grey looks pair natural color with clean shapes, a sharp bob, a soft layered lob, or a short crop with texture and movement. This era redefines aging as freedom. The message is simple: your hair should feel like you, healthy, effortless, and confidently real. A century of Australian hairstyles tells a story of freedom, practicality, and self-trust. For women over 50, beauty in Australia has never been about perfection. It has always been about living comfortably, confidently, and authentically. Next week, our journey continues to a land of refined minimalism, deep tradition, and evolving elegance. Join us as we explore 100 years of hair in China. We'll see you then.